In America, we make a big noise about the American dream. We are taught that it's there for the taking, but you have to want it. You have to be willing to work for it. So, we go to work, and that becomes who we are. A nation of dreamers, chasing a shared vision of success, generation after generation after generation. Realizing our dreams the only way that we know how, through hard work, perseverance, and earning respect.
You coming to work or going home?
Coming in.
I'm up at 4:30, and I get the newspaper from the distributor because I'm here before they even distribute it to the newsstands. My name's not in the obituary, which is very important. I always check that in the morning, too.
My dad's 71 years old, and I can remember as a child, I mean, he did the same thing. He was going into work early in the morning. He would be the only one there getting everything started up. And it's hard for people to understand. They don't understand the concept of a CEO or a president of a company going to those lengths.
Ever since I was a baby and can remember, he was always here. And he's been doing it for so long that this is his life.
Gonna get a load of pallets up here. Load of pallets.
My dad is very hands-on, and he always has been. If he vows to do something, he's gonna do it well, and he's gonna do it right. And I think he does it because he genuinely loves it.
This is what he likes to do. He enjoys coming to work and being here all day. That's the kind of person he is, and that's how he's built the business.
D.G. Yingling and Son was founded in 1829 by German immigrant David Gottlieb Yingling. In the near 2 centuries that followed, the reins of the old brewery on Mahantongo Street have passed down through 5 generations, each owner leaving their mark on the family business, guiding it through the triumphs and trials of their times to become America's oldest brewery.
I haven't been in here in so long where you could actually walk. This is a composition book written in German, and maybe even recipes. It's incredible.
I went over to Germany a couple years ago, and we found out that the founder, David G. Yingling, his father started brewing beer in 1816, and I think that DG was the youngest of the children and had no chance of ever taking over the brewery. So I guess in 1828, he set sail over the United States, landed in Philadelphia, and coal had been discovered about 25 years earlier up in this area. So these little towns were growing and growing. I mean, Pottsville went from like 250 people to 500 to 1,000, and was getting bigger and bigger, and it was a good place for a brewery to begin with.
But he specifically chose Pottsville as well because of the natural spring water. very soft water, which was very good for brewing German-style beers, and also because there were hills.
There was no refrigeration in those days. There was no electricity. So you had to keep your beer cold underground in caves.
We're now coming into the famous Yingling Caves. They were dug in the mid-1800s, all by local coal miners. And the purpose was to age the beer, lager the beer at a long, slow process. Here's one of the old storage tanks right here behind us.
You don't have a full appreciation for the tunnels that were dug underneath this brewery until you actually go down and experience it.
I love the caves. I think they're unique. I think there's so much history. You know, DG was down there, and Frederick and Frank. I mean, there's the history here.
This is the old spiral staircase that we cut out right here. And I'm guessing these gentlemen were down here in the Racking Cellar. Above them is the filtration room and the storage beer where they send it down these pipes. The same light bulb is still hanging here. It's pretty amazing to think that we work in the same place these guys worked in 150 years ago. We even have the same rubber boots. We're coming down into the Racking Cellar now. It's probably one of the oldest parts of the brewery. It's where we filled all the kegs, all of our draft beer, which we had draft beer before we even had bottles and cans. So this room is probably from the late 1800s. And all the kegs were filled by hand. After it was filled, you released it, and the man on the other side would have to roll it down. And this floor was all old bricks, and it wasn't even because of all the kegs, thousands of kegs running over it for 100 years. And very physical, because each keg had to be stacked by hand. So by the time you got to the other end of the room, you were pretty wet from all the beer and water splashing all over. And on a hot day, the bees would chase you home.
To see this kind of documentation of the history, you feel like you should just like soak it all up and absorb it. And I love the old pictures because a lot of the formal pictures you see, everybody's very serious, but the second generation, the three brothers, were very silly in photos. And when you find pictures of them having fun, it starts to tell a story about who they were.
DG had 3 sons, David Jr., Frederick, and William. David Jr. opened his own brewery in Richmond, Virginia, and William passed away at the age of 36. Frederick joined his father's business in 1873, changing the name to DG Yingling & Son. Frederick passed in 1899, leaving control of the family business to his only son, Frank.
My grandfather was 21 years old in 1899. He got a message that his father died, and he had to come home and run the brewery, which was deeply in debt because they had just built all these buildings and borrowed money to do it.
As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the looming specter of the prohibition of the sale of alcohol was very real to Americans and American breweries.
At that point, we were almost 100 years old. So for a company to make it that long is monumental. And to know that your business is about to change dramatically because the product you make is no longer allowed, I think it had to be terrifying.
It's very difficult to imagine what that time period was like when Prohibition began. What do? You employ people, and you know, what do you do with your business when the government suddenly comes in and says you can't make this product anymore?
These brick walls were built for Prohibition in 1920. They were government-ordered walls, and the thinking was, if the brewery's gonna cheat and brew beer, they're not gonna give us the tunnels to age the beer, so it would spoil quickly. It had to be devastating for most breweries in the United States. People had to go back into the coal mines for jobs.
I would have been very bitter at the government for putting breweries out of business the way they did and putting all these people out of work. I'm talking thousands of workers that lost their jobs.
When you're tested like that, you're forced to figure it out because you know that you've got all these families depending on you. It just feels surreal when you look around and you know that your ancestors touched all this and we still have access to it. This is very cool. This is the passport of Frank Yingling. It states to during Prohibition, 1929. Back to Germany. You wonder if he goes back there to find inspiration for the business, knowing that his whole way of life has changed. I think it's a testament to his perseverance. He had the foresight to go into the dairy business and diversify and keep it going so that he could keep all the families surviving in the town. I think it was incredible.
One of the ways we are still here today is the creativity that Frank Yingling had back in the 1930s. Not only did he start the ice cream business, but he made near beer as well. Near beer is 0.5% alcohol, which was legal in those days.
And they made non-alcoholic porter, they made non-alcoholic beers, but there were a lot of guys that snuck real beer out of their breweries in those days, and then they told me stories about how they'd run beer hoses down through the sewers underground and hit them, and they'd fill kegs down like a block away from the brewery. And there was a lot of that went on, you know. Whether I'd have partaken in it, I don't know. Probably not, but maybe.
Frank Yingling had steered the brewery through some of the darkest times in its history. And upon his death in 1963, the fourth generation of Yingling ownership, that of Dorman and Richard L. Yingling, began. 8 years later, Dorman would pass away, leaving Richard the sole proprietor of his family's business.
Looking back to the generation when my grandfather and his brother controlled the brewery, probably around the 1950s, 1960s, so many small local town breweries were either bought up by the mega breweries, they went out of business, the families didn't have any interest in them anymore.
One girl in the office one time said to me, Richard, you better go to college, because you know, our Friday receipts are just barely paying our payroll. And she said, you know, we're not in good shape here.
With the rise of interstate transportation and refrigeration and national advertising, they were putting small breweries out of business left and right.
And we were almost one of the victims of it. My dad had a buyer for the brewery, and I remember him telling somebody, what are you going to do with it? The guy said, well, I'm going to close it down and scrap the brass and copper. And then they walk away and leave the town with a shell. And when he heard that, he said, well, I'm not selling it then. And we just hung in there.
The company was not financially sound. I used to work with the accountant, and he would say how they could barely meet payroll. There were times where Pop-Pop would put money in just to pay the employees. They were really struggling.
And they had no money. My dad didn't have the money people thought he had. And, you know, I didn't know. And I wanted to build a warehouse, and I wanted to put all this machinery in and trying to make the company more efficient. And we'd fight about it. They said, we can't keep loading and unloading trucks by hand. I said, you can't do it and survive. So we need a warehouse. And, oh, you can't get trucks in there. You can't get the trucks in. There's no way to do it. I said, you can do it. You can get trucks in there. I know you can. So Eventually, he built this warehouse, and it worked.
Yeah, this is the area that they back their trailers into, our loading dock. There's a mark on the wall for everybody that's hit the wall and maybe ripped the mirrors off their tractor because there's not a lot of room here. You got to be a pretty good driver to get in and out of here. So these guys that come in here are veterans of coming in here, and they learn how to get in and out without wrecking their equipment.
I've had guys say, I'm not backing in there, I can't get in there. I said, get out of there, I'll put it in there for you.
Yeah, I used to work up in the warehouse, and I've witnessed him actually pulling the drivers out. It's tight up there, and he's good. He can get them in one shot.
Everything's clean. Give me knuckles.
We're now in Yingling's brew house. Up here, you have to deal with the heat. It will vary between 90 and 100. I mean, you're at the mercy of the kettles, and they're boiling. The modern breweries are all air conditioned, but we have to wait until October for the air conditioning to come in the windows. So as far as checking the beer, it's a brewmaster or a lead brewer's job every day of the week to smell the beer, to taste it. Just you get that certain feeling something's right or wrong. It's all right here. As far as our recipes, we have our portfolio. It's 150 years old. You have to follow it. It's secret recipes. No one has the authority to change that except Mr. Yingling. The best part of this job is to say, I brew Yingling beer. You don't know how many people envy us for that.
So this picture we found in the vault is of my dad and my grandfather in, I believe, 1985 when he took over. And my dad has dark hair. I haven't seen that in a while. I think that photo means a lot to me just because they're both laughing. It's nice to see because I know my dad is very serious about his work.
Without the capital to invest in modernizing the brewery, production had fallen off. Just barely surviving, D.G. Yingling and Son was at a crossroads. Dick Yingling took the reins of America's oldest brewery, knowing he had two choices: grow or fold.
When the time came in 1985 where my dad was able to come back and implement some of his ideas, we were at a low point. We were only producing 137,000 barrels of beer, and this place was barely running 5 days a week. But he had the insight and just had a feeling and an instinct of the things that he wanted to do to increase that capacity.
I'm a production nut. I involve myself in the production and just the everyday running of the company, and I need somebody in sales. That's not what I do well. And I wanted to hire Tony Casanelli.
And at that time, Dick was holding this brewery together with chewing gum and bale wire. So we had to do something. I said, number one, change all the packaging, labels, everything. They had a quality product, and I knew it. But the packaging, I won't use the word I would like to use.
Tony informed me that I needed some people in the sales department, which he was correct. He said, my son's not happy where his company's going. He said, you might want to take a look at him.
I was hesitant at first. I didn't know much about him, much about the company, but had probably one of the most unique interviews of my life. First of all, the setting was just something unique. It was an office that looked like it hadn't been touched in 150 years, which is probably true. But, you know, Dick just sat down and it wasn't structured. It was very informal. He wasn't hung up about my background or experience, but he wanted to know culturally if I was the right fit for him.
So we had a conversation. I said, okay.
I got home and of course my wife said to me, how did it go? And I said, you know, I can't explain it, but I just met a guy that I really want to work for. It wasn't the prettiest, it wasn't the most glamorous, but there was something charismatic about Dick that just said, I got to work for this guy.
I convinced David, change all the labels, all the cartons, everything immediately to justify that great product.
One of my dad's ideas was to be innovative and set Yingling Brewery apart, and his main focus was to come up with lager.
And then as time went on, I get the phone call from Dick. Dick being Dick. He said, I was thinking, I said, what are you thinking? He said, about bottles.
Everybody's got a brown bottle. Let's use a green bottle.
I wanted a green bottle because it projected an imported image.
And he came up with a Cadillac of a package. It was unbelievable. And that struck a fire.
We were selling way more than the brewery could sustain capacity-wise.
So my dad was at a point where he didn't know what to do. Should he build a brewery? Should he buy a brewery?
Let's build a brewery. And we started building it probably in September of that same year.
And for Christmas that year, my sisters and I, we got him a gift to the Phillies Fantasy Camp, which is their dream week where you go down and play with the old ball players in Clearwater, Florida. And it just so happens that a straw plant that was built in the 1950s in Tampa, Florida, was, lo and behold, for sale.
So I called Bill Henry, who was then the president, and I said, I'll buy it. That's how the whole thing came about. And I came back, I told David, I said, we're going to buy a plant in Tampa, Florida. And I could see his eyes rolling around in his head because I never told anybody I was going to do this.
That sort of defines who Dick is. His mind was already made up, and nobody was going to tell him otherwise.
We sent him to baseball camp, and he came back with a brewery. Ironically enough, though, it worked out where we were able to fill the pipeline from the beer from Tampa before we were able to get our new Mill Creek Brewery online.
This company is not corporate America. I want people here that can think for themselves, take pride in their work. We want things done right. And we keep people here that think that way. And you know what? It's a family operation.
I think people here work extremely hard, and so I would put people in our company up against any major brewery or small brewery out there. I really think we have the best people going. They truly believe in what they're doing.
The passion that we see with so many of our employees, I think, is because they're proud of our tradition. They're proud to say we're American-owned and family-operated.
Sure, you're the oldest one here, aren't you?
No, I'm not the oldest.
The tenure-wise.
Yes.
Tenure-wise.
I'm here the longest.
And you're not going to retire, are you? Until I do.
We'll go together.
We'll go together, okay.
I don't think the older generations ever thought it would be where it is today. I'm proud to be a part of it and to know that those were my family members that grew it to where it needs to be, particularly my dad. He worked hard.
He took it over when it was on the verge of closing. He grew it from nothing to what it is today.
And if you go into any bar in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh and you ask for a lager, chances are you're going to get a Yingling. I think it would be fair to say that we're one of the very few companies in the country that has an owner that is as hands-on as he is. But that's what got him to where he is today, and that's the passion that he has for the brewery and his company and his family. And you can't take that away from him because that's who he is and that's what our company is all about.
When Dick comes here, he walks around, goes on the floor and talks to all the employees, and they get so excited because we're part of the family.
Having a family-owned business is just so important to me because there's not very many of them left, whether it's in the beer business or any other business. You know, to think, I get like a little emotional. The 4 other generations put their time in here, and this goes back 155 years ago. Somebody kept this thing going, even through Prohibition. That's pretty rewarding, you know? I'm the 5th guy to run this thing. There's very few family businesses that last past 3 generations. And our family's going into 6 and maybe 7. And I admire the work ethic that people in the family have and the commitment they have to success. And, you know, it's only 55 years ago that the statement was made, we may not make it. So, you know, we're still here.
I think there's something special about the beer industry. It's fun. It's fun. Everybody wants to have a beer.
Yingling has provided people with almost like snapshots in their lives that they shared that experience over a Yingling and what it meant to them. And it just really speaks to the passionate nature that people are about the brands, about the company, about our culture and who we stand for. And the fact that they take time to send us pictures, to write to us, send videos. It's really neat to know that Yingling is a proud component of a lot of people's lives.
You don't have to be the biggest. You don't have to be the most successful in anything you do. Just do it well. And that, to me, is great.